Welcome to This Is My Story, a podcast dedicated to sharing your story and how God has helped you take next steps in your journey of faith. I'm your host, Austin Carrick, and let's dive into today's story. Thank you for joining us today as we dive into today's story. So today we are here with Pastor Chris Smeltz, the Ephrata location pastor for Victory Church. And Pastor Chris, we just love you and your family so much. And we are so excited for today. And I know we're definitely going to have you back in the future because there's just so much to your story. But today we want you to dig a little bit into just your testimony and how you came to Christ and what that was like. So start at the beginning. Like how did you grow up? What was that like?
Yeah, well, good to be here first,
Yes.
Austin.
Oh,
Thanks.
absolutely.
Glad to be here. So my story started, I grew up in a Christian home. My mom and dad are kind of patriarchs, so they kind of stepped out and started that, kind of put a stake in the ground and said, they have a relationship with Jesus, and so they wanted us to have a relationship with Jesus, me and my brother. So growing up in that, I was in church all the time, a couple different churches throughout the years. But when my story begins, I think, middle school. I got baptized at the age of 13, so I took that step. When I got to high school, though, that's when some things started to change. So I started to see that I had influence in my school.
Yeah.
I had struggle with, and I wouldn't have said this at the time. So I'm saying this at 43, looking back on like 15-year-old Chris, if you will. I struggled with the fear of man, and what people thought of me meant a lot to me. And so that caused a lot of problems in my life because you start to, I'm following Jesus and I'm walking through the halls of my school, but that's not popular.
Yeah.
People don't like that, right?
Yeah.
And so I had to start making a lot of compromises in my faith to start to please these people over here. If I'm going to walk with this crowd, the in crowd, Jesus isn't cool with the in crowd, right?
Wow.
And so I struggled with that. I played football. It's a big part of my story. Sports was always something. I didn't grow up in a family that loved sports. I just was kind of an anomaly, and I was really passionate about football and baseball.
So how did that happen? Where was your exposure to sports? Like, how did that begin?
Well, my exposure to sports was just as a young kid. So sitting at home at 8 years old, I can remember the first Eagles game I watched.
I'll say, who was your idol? Who was that person?
So actually, specifically in my mind, I remember there's a specific game that the Eagles played against the Giants. And as a young boy, I was watching Randall Cunningham play. And there's an iconic play that he made on Monday night. I wasn't even supposed to be up watching it. I had gotten up and snuck downstairs to watch the end of the game. So my parents are in bed. I'm watching this Eagles game at like 9 years old, 8 years old, and he makes an incredible play. And from that point on, I was just hooked.
Wow.
In it. Yeah. And I wasn't blessed with that kind of talent, but I just wanted to emulate those guys.
No, that's awesome. So you get saved, you commit your life to Christ in middle school? Is that when that happened?
So I would have been baptized at 13. I mean, early on, I had prayed a prayer when I was probably like 6 or 7. You come home from church. I heard in Sunday school, people who don't know Jesus go to hell. So I had that conversation with my mom of like, hey, I don't want to go to hell. And so we had that prayer. But then, as I get into high school, then things are really changing, and I'm starting to struggle with just how I find my worth as a student, as a young person. And so then I started pursuing relationships because I was a big fish in a small pond. Garden Spot High School is not a big high school. The football team wasn't that great, but I started to see some success even as a young player. Yeah. And the team started to go through some transition at that time. So that even
opened more opportunity.
Right, because even as a sophomore, it was like, well, we don't have a lot of guys, so we're going to have to use this guy. If I was on a better team, I wouldn't have had those opportunities as early as I did. So then you start to get a lot of attention, and I started to get a lot of attention from females. And so I started to look to relationships with girls to fulfill me. That was what I was looking to. I wouldn't have known that at the time. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, in my story, it became something that I had a different girlfriend like every 3 months because that's where I was finding my identity or value. And so then as I got older, when I was a sophomore, I dated a girl that was a senior. So she was much older than me and pushed me sexually further than I would have ever wanted to go. And there's an old saying about sin. It'll take you further than you want to go, and it'll cost you more than you want to pay.
Yeah.
And so that then marked my life at that point.
Wow.
I started to struggle from that point on in those relationships. And I wasn't talking to anybody about it. And if I can say anything that I look back on and regret, I wish that I had begun to have conversations with people that I trusted. Like I was keeping my parents in the dark about those things. There was a youth pastor that was involved in my life that he played a vital role in my life. And I'll get to his, like that role he played. But I wasn't talking to him. And so I was just leaving people out, and it was causing me to live a double life because I was doing the church thing. I was going to youth group, going to church, but then I was on the side, I was doing all these other things. So actually my wife and I went to school together, and Erin didn't like me in high school because she was like, you were somebody who said you followed Jesus, said you were in relationship with Christ, but your life didn't reflect it.
Wow.
And I saw it. And so she did not like the hypocrisy.
So were you and Erin in the same grades then?
Yeah, we were in the same grade.
So did you grow up together in school, or did you meet each other later in the school
So it would have
years?
been like I moved back to the New Holland area in 8th grade. Eighth grade we would have started, like we would have, I would have known her. I had a high amount of respect for Erin. And I knew she wasn't the kind of girl I would have dated in high school, partially because of the stuff I was doing, right? And so... but yeah, that's a unique part of our story. So
she had a front row seat, though, to this season of Chris Melt's life.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, that's cool. Though.
Yeah, and she did not like me at all. So then we can get to the point where my life changed. So I had a dramatic encounter with Jesus in the middle of my senior year. So it's January of my senior year. That youth pastor that had been so invested in my life and continued to follow up with me. Like there would be seasons where I wasn't at youth group for a while because I was doing other things. And we didn't have cell phones back then, so he would just stop by my house. Like if he saw my car was there, he'd stop in and talk to me. And so one time he invited me to a ski retreat that the church was going on. And so I was like, all right, didn't have anything going on that weekend. And so I decided to go on this retreat. So I get on the bus, and it's a chartered bus driving 2 hours. It was great. That youth group did a great job of planning those events. And
I feel like a youth group event like that can go one of two ways.
Yeah.
So I'm glad to hear this was a success story.
It was great. It was great. It changed my life. But the Lord met me that night on that bus.
Wow.
And that's where my life changed. And the story behind that is, so we get on the bus, and back then we didn't have iPad or iPods or phones. Nobody had any of that stuff. We had Walkmans, right? So I had the CD player, or I didn't have it. Everybody else had it. I didn't have one. And I had this strange compulsion to read the Word of God. So we're driving to the Poconos, and everybody else is kind of, headphones on, not talking. And I just turned that little light on, and I opened the Word of God. And I read one verse, and it's John 14:15. And it says, if you love me, you'll obey my commands.
Wow.
And
so how did you get to that?
It was like the audible voice. Oh, I just opened the Bible.
You just opened. It was one of those times where you were just like, I'm just opening, and God, show me something.
Exactly.
Wow.
Like I didn't even know where to read. At that time, I hadn't spent a lot of time in the Word. I mean, I knew all of the stories from Sunday school and stuff like that, but I didn't know, okay, God, like I feel like you're telling me to read, so I just opened. And that's the passage I opened to.
Wow.
And it was like I heard the audible voice. It was like Jesus was sitting right beside me. And saying that if you love me, you obey my commands. And a lot of people take that verse in the wrong way. They take that verse in like, if you love me, you'll do what I tell you to do, right? Like God's strong-arming you into obedience. What I realized in that moment, and I was broken in that moment of, I say that I love Jesus. There is nothing in my life that represents my love for Christ. And it even makes me a little bit emotional now to think about it, because that weekend I got emotional, and that night there were some dear friends that were on that trip that were following Christ and walking with the Lord. And I sat with them, and I started to tell them my story of like, hey, here's where I'm at. Here's the things I'm doing and going through, and will you walk with me? And they were so gracious and kind. It was visibly seeing the grace of God in the face of other people. Like people who could have been judgmental to me, people who could have said, you're all about yourself. You're all about popularity and all of that kind of stuff, but graciously receiving me and praying with me on that retreat, it marked my life.
Wow.
And it changed everything for me.
That is what an incredible story.
Yeah.
So you go to this retreat then. Was the retreat more, you said it was a ski retreat?
Yeah, ski retreat, yep.
So were there times then of like worship, of prayer?
Absolutely.
And like, what did that feel like to you then, now having this new commitment, like, and you grew up going to these things, like, what was a different feeling? Like, what was that like?
Total shift in how I viewed our time together, like that was planned.
Yeah.
I had always gone on those retreats that like, oh, I want to go because there's the fun stuff to do or the people that are there. And all of a sudden I was like looking forward to the times where we were worshiping together or there was teaching, and I was beginning to soak that in.
Yeah.
I was actually paying attention. I was actually plugging my mind into those moments and not daydreaming. But I wanted more of that.
Yeah.
And so that was a total shift for me. It was awkward to be in that like moment of like, wow, I can't wait till the session starts because we get to worship together and I get to hear a lesson.
Yep.
Like that was something I could have cared less about before that.
I was always like, I'm going to go play football with my friends. And we'd be playing football. Then like 20 minutes later, we're in a service and I'm like, like bawling and crying on these youth retreats. Cause same thing. You're like, what a great time this is going to be. We're going to have so much fun. And then the Lord just meets you right there. And you're just like, that's not what I was expecting, but thank God for doing this.
Yeah. Exactly.
That was always some of my favorite memories of being a teen and going to those retreats and those kind of events.
Yep.
So now you have this encounter with Jesus. You're how old at this point?
So I was 18.
18. You're in your senior year.
Yep.
Now you go back to school then. Sounds like a winter retreat.
Yep.
What is that like then this last semester of high school?
So everything changed then. So my life, everything changed. So I had a group of friends that I was running with at the time that I knew, okay, like I can't keep running with this group of friends because if I do, the things that they're doing don't align with my faith.
Yeah.
And so I came back. I broke up with the girlfriend I was dating at the time because I knew the stuff we were doing was not glorifying to God.
Yeah.
It was out of alignment. It was sin, to say it clearly. And so I knew that was a problem. And even at that point, she had told me like, oh, I want to make these changes with you. And I was like, that's great. I hope you do, but we can't stay in this relationship.
Yeah.
And I actually made a commitment at that point to say, all right, Lord, I'm not dating, I'm not getting in a relationship for 6 more months. And that actually plays into my relationship with Aaron. But then my friendships, all I did with those friendships was I invited them to come with me.
Yeah.
I was like, hey, like, if you want to come, check out church.
Them. Yeah, you brought them along.
For most of them, they were like, no. Some of them said, this is a phase you're going through. Like you had this Jesus moment, but you'll grow out of that. It won't last. And here I am, 23 years later, and still walking with the Lord. But that was some of the attitude. And a couple of them actually came to youth group. One guy gave his life to the Lord as a result of that. But there was a unique thing at Garden Spot at that time we had at that school, there was in our class, there was probably 15 or 20 of us that ran together. And that group of people really accepted me. It was a great group of believers, and kudos to those families and stuff like that in the churches in the area because they really brought me in and I didn't feel judged by them at all. And it was great to just be invited into the circle there of friends.
Yeah. So at this point, we're in winter, ending that. Are you still involved in sports at that time? Did your relationship with Jesus change any of those team interactions?
So baseball was about to begin. So baseball season around here starts in March.
Okay.
And so going into baseball season, my mentality shifted. So when I played football in the fall, I was a lot more me focused.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't have known that at the time.
Yeah.
Now looking back, I wasn't a great teammate. I was not somebody that said, hey, I need the ball and I need the spotlight. What I mean when I say I wasn't a great teammate, I looked at the younger guys on the team, I wouldn't say with disdain, but I didn't really focus on what the influence that I could have with them. If I could say anything about the 4 years that of my high school career, I felt like God had given me a position of influence and I wasted it on myself.
Wow.
So I wasn't necessarily like, depending on who you talk to, I wasn't a terrible person. So I don't want to paint the light. Like I don't want to paint it in the wrong light. But I just had opportunities to make an impact in kids that were younger than I was, that were looking up to me, and I didn't see that at all. So coming to baseball season, I started to look at that differently. Like I started to look at like, oh, these younger guys, like they need somebody to mentor them. They need somebody to bring them along. Some of them are afraid to even come out to practice because, what's it going to be like to be with these older guys? And I'm intimidated.
Yeah.
And I had forgotten what that was like. And so now as a senior on that baseball team, I was able to be a captain and a leader in a different way than I had been before, not just with performance, but actually caring about the people that were on the team with me, even those guys that were on the JV squad. And some of those relationships, people have even come to me later in time and said, man, you were a really great leader. Like I really looked up to you during that season.
Yeah.
And I hadn't even thought about it that way.
Wow. No, that's what a perspective shift. And again, in those moments, you don't really notice that. But now looking back, you're like, wow, that was such a moment of influence that I had.
Sure.
So now you're graduating then at this point. So where does life take you there?
Yeah. So graduation comes, and even all the way back to that retreat, I felt like because I had wasted those 4 years, and God was doing things in those 4 years, but I had wasted my opportunity for influence. I felt this compulsion to work with young people. I was like, I don't want people to make the same mistakes that I did during their high school years.
Yeah.
And so I looked for ways to get involved in student ministry stuff. And so the youth pastor that I had been with, he's like, hey, would you come and volunteer at this camp? It was called Ultimate Experience Camp. It's out in Conestoga. So I came and did a couple weeks there of volunteering and on staff with that group there. And then I also volunteered at the church that I was at the time. It was actually when I started attending the same church that Aaron was at. It was Bethany Mennonite at the time. I just got involved with the youth group. I said, hey, how can I help? So got involved with middle school.
Was that strategic going to the same church as Aaron, or that was kind of just God bringing it all together?
By that point, we started dating.
Okay.
So by that point, the 6 months that I had talked about in January, that was up in June. She wanted to date me before that.
Wow. So she was somebody who was like, wow, I want nothing to do with this guy.
She saw the shift in me.
Wow, that's incredible.
She would tell you that. So she saw a complete change in my life. And so we actually went to prom together in the spring.
That's so
but
neat.
just as friends.
Yeah.
So then we started dating after we had just after we graduated, like 2 weeks after we graduated. And then she was already volunteering on the junior high ministry at the church. And so I just joined her in that.
Yeah.
But I poured myself into that. That was something that we did together. And I just wanted to make an impact in those young people and those young students. So I looked for every opportunity that God was opening those doors. And I was saying, God, just use me however you want to be an influence for these young people.
Yeah.
And so God began to open up doors there as well.
That's awesome. That's incredible.
Yeah.
So then life after high school, so you start serving and you're in ministry positions of volunteer and being a part of youth specifically. Where does God take your life then? You're dating Aaron. Life seems good.
Yeah.
What happens after that season right there? What's the next?
Yeah. I mean, the next step really would have been, I went to college. I went to East Stroudsburg University. That was the track I was on because I was going to play football there. So I went and played my freshman year of football. I played at East Stroudsburg University. I was going to be a gym teacher. That was the track because I thought, well, what better job can you have than to wear sweatpants and roll a ball out every day? No offense to gym teachers out there. But that's the way I looked at the job. As a teenager, I was like, this is like the easiest job in the world. It involves sports, and you
get to influence kids. You get to influence people. Yeah.
So Aaron and I continued to date through that year, long distance relationship, a little bit, 2 hours, if you want to call that long distance. And it was great. It was a hard season. I made some great friends, and there again, the Lord marked my life with the people of the Christian Fellowship at East Stroudsburg. So a secular university, 8,000 students on the campus. There's about 80 people that meet on a Thursday night in the bottom of one of the dorms, and that was the Christian Fellowship.
Oh, wow.
And so I found a flyer the first day I was there, and I was like, I'm going to that welcome picnic. I put myself out there. So that's one thing I would encourage people in, is take that next step, activate your faith, find people that have similar values that you do, that have relationship. I made some great friends there that really impacted my life. But then I ended up dropping out of East Stroudsburg just because Aaron and I wanted to get married.
Yeah.
So that starts our story together the next year. We got married and just continued to pursue the Lord together in ministry, and committing my life. As what I did from that point on then was, all right, Lord, like, as you open doors, I want to be able to walk through them. And I've tried throughout my life to just open my hands like this and say, okay, God, what do you have for me?
Yeah,
There's been some seasons in my life where I've done this again, and the Lord's had to remind me, all right, Chris, open your hands again. And so coming back to that place of, all right, God, where do you want me?
Yeah. Wow. That's incredible. And here we are now, 20 some years later from that salvation story, and just the work the Lord's done in your life and in your family and through you. And we're so honored to have you on the team here at Victory as one of our pastors. And you and Aaron are just such a beautiful couple, and just display that love of Christ so well, and help people and engage in that community and just feel so loved by Christ. So thank you for sharing that part of your story with us.
Awesome.
I know that we're definitely going to have you on future episodes just to hear more about what the Lord's been doing in your life, and just next steps that you and your family have taken together. So that's incredible. Any last words you want to say to any high schoolers out there to just encourage them?
Oh, man, that's a great question, Austin. Find people that are going to make you better. Your friends will determine your future. So the people you place around you, place people in your life that are going to make you a better person and push you towards good decisions. Show me your friends, I'll show you your future. Pastor says it all the time. When you're in high school, the importance of community, and then obviously putting Jesus first in all the things you do.
That's so good. Well, thank you, Pastor Chris. That wraps our episode for today. You can check out next Monday. We'll have another episode online. So we are so excited about that. Thank you again, Pastor Chris.
Anytime.
Everybody, be blessed today. Have a wonderful day. Thank you for joining us on this episode of This Is My Story. Hearing these incredible accounts of God's work in our lives reminds us of the enduring power of faith. If you've been moved by these stories, don't forget to subscribe on your preferred podcast platform and on YouTube. And don't forget to share the inspiration with others who might need it. This Is My Story is recorded at Victory Church in the heart of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. You can learn more about This Is My Story and Victory Church in the show notes. Thank you for listening, and be blessed.